Hello there and welcome to the Card Grotto. Today I've got a card to share with you using floral die cuts and embossing with stencils. So let's get started. This is the beautiful Fantasy Flowers die set from Syberia Designs. There are lots of different ways that you can use this set. There are some flowers that you can layer up in different ways, and then also some beautiful leaves and a stem as well. And I'm not actually using the stems today, but I love that you can use this set, like I said, in lots of different ways. So I've cut the flowers from some aqua, pink and purple cardstock. And I'm just taking the front layer of the flowers because I want to add some distress ink onto these. So I'm adding some temporary adhesive onto a piece of scrap paper and I'm just placing my flowers on top. This is just a good way to be able to add some ink blending onto it without getting my fingers in the way and keeping them kind of held down. But you could definitely use a sticky mat or something like that as well. So I'm adding some distress ink towards the bottom of these flower layers because they've got a lovely kind of line detail to them, but I think it got a little bit lost with the colours of cardstock, and so I just wanted to emphasise them slightly. And as you can see, as I'm adding the ink blending on top, it's really bringing out that detail. So for the pink flower I used picked raspberry distress ink. For the aqua flower I'm using Peacock feathers distress ink, and actually there's not a huge amount of difference between the colour of cardstock that I used and this ink, but I still think it made a little bit of a difference. Just added a little bit darker blend towards the bottom of this flower. And then for the purple flower I'm using Wilted violet distress ink, and this is one of the smaller size of the flowers. There are two sizes, the larger size and the smaller size, and so I'm using two of the larger size and one of the smaller ones. And you can see that that detail really kind of comes out once you add the ink blending on top. And the leaves have the same thing, so I'm going to do the same thing with a Mowed lawn distress ink. And this colour of cardstock for the leaves is Peridot by Spellbinders, and I think that this distress ink works really nicely. It just adds a little bit of extra depth towards the bottom of these leaves, and like I said, brings out that kind of vein detailing as well. So I can just lift off all of those leaves from my scrap paper. And as the kind of ink sort of blends in and dries into the cardstock, I think it just makes it a little bit smoother, and I do really like the effect. So now I'm going to adhere all of the layers of the flowers together. So I have a darker colour of, or shade of cardstock I should say, at the back of the flower, and then a lighter one at the front. And then for the flower centres there are two different layers, and I've cut them from Spellbinders chamomile and beeswax cardstock, so just a lighter yellow and then a slightly darker yellow. I think in the example on the Syberia Designs website they use kind of like a dark colour in the centre of the flowers, but I wanted this card to be quite bright colours and quite happy, so I decided to use yellows today. So I'm adding some liquid glue onto the back of these pieces and then just popping those down. And I've got the layer, kind of like the front layer of the flower on top, but I haven't actually adhered that down just so that I can see where I need to pop these pieces in. And then I can add some more liquid glue onto the back of the front layer. I think these would look really pretty if I added the front layer with some foam tape, but I already know that I'm adding 3 layers of foam tape to this card as it is, so I didn't really want these to be even more dimensional, but I do think it would look really pretty. So the great thing about liquid glue is that I can take my time and kind of wiggle the pieces together and line them up as best as possible. For the pink flower I used Hero Art's Peony and Ultra Pink cardstock. For the purple flower I'm using Spellbinders Purple Mist and Lilac Blossom cardstock. And then for the aqua flower I'm using Waterfall cardstock from Spellbinders and then Hero Art's Paradise. And I will have a link to all of those cardstocks and colours and everything in the description bar on YouTube and also over on my blog. So I can just finish off by adhering this last flower. I'm then going to stamp a sentiment from the Syberia Designs For You stamp set, and I'm taking the Happy Birthday sentiment and I'm going to stamp that down onto some white cardstock. This is kind of like a reverse image, so you stamp the outside of the sentiment rather than the sentiment itself. So I'm picking up that stamps in my mini MISTI, and then I'm going to ink up the stamp with Altenew Obsidian Pigment ink. This is a really beautiful dark black ink. It is a pigment ink, so it does take a little while to dry. So I did actually, after stamping it, left it to dry for, I don't know, maybe about 15 minutes. I don't think it necessarily needs that long to dry, but I did leave it that long just in case. But you could definitely kind of heat it with a heat tool to set that as well. So I do stamp this image twice just to make sure that I get a really nice dark impression. And then after it's dried for a little while, I'm going to cut it out with a sentiment strip from the Syberia Designs Spring Garden die set. So this sentiment isn't, or this die I should say, isn't made to cut out this sentiment, but I thought it worked really nicely for it. So I just ran that through my die cutting machine, and then it's kind of cut the top and the bottom, and now I'm just cutting off the sides with a mini guillotine. And then because I stamped this onto white cardstock, I wanted to kind of neaten it up a little bit and kind of make it look like it was black cardstock. So I'm taking a Copic Multiliner, and this is with a brush tip, and I'm just running that around the edges of this piece here. And like I said, I think it just neatens it up slightly and makes it look like I didn't even stamp it and then it was on black cardstock. Next, I want to create a subtle background, so I'm taking the Syberia Designs Speckled Background stencil, and I'm going to emboss that onto some white cardstock. So I'm using the Platinum 6 die cutting machine here, and I've got the platform at the bottom, the platform top, the stencil, and then my cardstock panel. And then I'm taking a scrap piece of printer paper, and then I'm adding on the embossing mat on top of that, and then also the adapter plate D. And I find that this sandwich works really nicely for embossing with stencils. So I can just run that through the die cutting machine. It's not going to give like a huge impression like it would do if you were using an embossing folder, but I do think it adds some really nice kind of subtle detail onto the background of this card. And it's a great way to extend the life of stencils as well, so you can use them in different ways. So you can see here I've got those spots all embossed onto the background of this panel here. So next I'm going to place the flowers on top, just figuring out where I want them to end up before I stick them down. And then I've got all of the leaves here that I can kind of just pop behind as well. I wanted to make an arrangement sort of in the centre of this panel, sort of more towards the top of the panel. Once I'm happy with the placement, I can add some liquid glue onto the back of these leaves. And then I'm trying to hold the arrangement in place with my fingers and then pop the leaves behind. And then I can do that with most of the leaves, but I am leaving the large one not adhered down just to start with in case I wanted to move it. And the great thing, like I said, about the liquid glue is that you have got a little bit of time to sort of move things around if you're not completely happy with the placement. So I'm going to leave it as that for the leaves for the time being, and then I'm going to adhere the flowers down, and I'm adhering them down with some thin foam tape. So we can just remove the backings with some tweezers, and then I can pop that down. And I really love using tweezers because I just find it so much easier to kind of hover the whatever I'm sticking down basically on top, and then make sure I like it before I actually stick it down. So I've added thin foam tape onto the back of all of these flowers, and then I haven't actually adhered down that aqua flower yet. I'm just popping in the leaf behind first. and then I can adhere that flower down. I'm then adding some thin foam tape onto the back of this panel, and I'm adhering that down onto an A2 size white card base. So that's a finished size of 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. I'm adding some more thin foam tape onto the back of the sentiment strip, and then I can adhere that down on top. And I really love using the thin foam tape because I can sort of get away with adding quite a lot of layers of this thin foam tape without adding too much bulk. So I'm just bringing in a T-square ruler here just to help me out so that I can try and adhere this sentiment down straight. So I kind of just place it down to start with, and then once I'm happy that it's straight, I can press that down. And then to finish off, to add a little bit of embellishment and also some kind of sparkle and shine, I'm adding some Studio Katia iridescent bubbles. So I'm adding some dabs of the Barely Art glue, and then I can pick up those bubbles with an embellishment wand and pop those in place. And that is the card finished for today. I love those flowers. Like I said, I think you could use them in lots of different ways. And I really love how that background works. Just a really nice subtle kind of texture and interest to that. But still a really nice, clean and simple card, which I personally really love. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on my blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.